Mike LaCorte, and welcome to another episode of Leaders Podcast. Leaders Live, actually. This podcast is a little bit different. We're in the studio for another live session, and today I've got an interesting guest, a client, a friend, someone who we flew out to the World Association of Detectives annual centenary conference in Chicago to talk about her story. I've got to be careful what I say and how I introduce her, and I've been briefed with the letters of SS, which stand for Secret Solicitor. Now, the Secret Solicitor is a normal person, a normal solicitor that's working in doing personal injury claims and a whole other legal services, and her life was turned upside down by what we're going to talk about today. So, SS, thank you for coming and taking time to speak to me today. I'm very excited to listen to your story and journey and what you've gone through over the last 12 years?
11
years. Okay, so before we get into your case, why the secrecy? Why can I call you SS, which stands for the Secret Solicitor?
Good afternoon, Mike. Thank you very much for having me here today. Well, it's as you said earlier, I am a practicing solicitor. I have been for over 25 years, and I don't particularly want my clients to know that it is our family that this happened to, and the secrecy and who I am isn't important. It's the story and the message that I want to get across that's important, and how to help other British nationals who sadly may find themselves in our situation. And the second reason is that I was asked not to say anything negative about Pakistan, which is where the crime occurred.
Okay, so we're going to get into the crime. In a nutshell, in a small couple of sentences, your mother was murdered in Pakistan, and you found that out retrospectively over some events that have taken place. Yeah. And you've been fighting for some sort of justice ever since.
We have. We actually gave up on trying to get justice quite a few years after. And my journey then took another turn, and it then became a case of recovering the assets that had been stolen from my parents that were in Lahore. They had a holiday home. They had various other assets and 2 plots of land, which all vanished.
Okay, so let's break this down. So I want to try and get this in a understandable step-by-step format. 2014, what happened?
My father had a very severe strain of Alzheimer's, and my mum was concerned because they had a holiday home in Lahore where they used to visit once a year. They also had 2 plots of land that they had bought for investment purposes, and they had 50 grand in a post office savings account over there.
They were living over there?
No, they lived in London,
right,
for 40 plus years, and they bought this home 10 years earlier, just as a place, a
Sure.
holiday home for the family to go if anyone was over in Lahore visiting. And she was unable to sell the house, and she phoned me and said, look, I'm coming home and I'll go back in March the following year, 2015, to resume my efforts to sell the property. 2 days later, we got a call that she was dead.
And she travelled there alone?
She took my father with him. At the time, he had a little bit of capacity. She needed him to countersign the paperwork to sell the property.
Okay, so she 2 days later she died. How were you told about this?
So we got a phone call from our uncle, my dad's brother, saying that your mum's passed away, and that she's had a heart attack, which I was stunned. There was nothing wrong with my mum. She just turned 70. She was relatively healthy. She had type 2 diabetes, which she managed through diet. She didn't have to take any medication. So, yeah, it was just really bizarre, but we had to accept, it does happen.
But at that point, you wouldn't think that there was anything off. You would have just accepted that and ran through the process, right?
Yeah, the process was repatriating mum's body back to
Sure.
the UK. My youngest sister had to go over to Lahore to bring dad back, and obviously travel with my mum. And then we tried our best to resume our lives as normally as possible. And then a year passed before we were hit with the most shocking news.
Go on then. So a year, then after a year...
Exactly 1 year after, we got a
Right.
call from my dad's brother.
Right.
And he said that, I don't know what's going on. He was in a complete panic. And he said that the house has been sold. And I said, what do you mean it's been sold? And he said, well, it belongs to a guy called Salman Bersha, which is the name I've given to the guy that was supposed to be helping my mum sell her property in my book. And I was like, but how can he was supposed to be helping my mum sell it. I don't understand how he owns it. And my mum told me that she hadn't been able to sell the property and that she was going to go back in a year's time. And he said, no, the property belongs to this guy.
So the person that was supposedly helping your mother sell the property while she was alive now owned the property.
Not just the house. We then discovered he owned the 2 plots of land, and the £50,000 from their savings account vanished.
So who was this guy?
So he was a friend of my mum's brother. My mum's brother, who lives here in London, and he had insisted that she use his friend, and he'll do a great job, and he'll help you sell the house, and he'll get you a good price.
While she obviously still alive, and then so was she planning on selling the house at that point, pre-214?
Yeah, I mean, that's why she had travelled
Right.
with my dad to sell the house, because of dad's Alzheimer's, so that
Sure.
that was an asset that had been dealt with, so that she could enjoy the rest of her time in London.
So talk me through that point. You got a phone call. Now the guy that your uncle's introduced now owns the property. What happened next?
So I knew that something terrible had happened, and
But at that point, did you suspect?
I didn't suspect that my mum might have been killed.
No, yeah, we'll definitely get onto that. But now that these assets are in this third party's name, did you think what?
No,
why?
it
didn't.
just didn't make
Didn't
sense.
make sense.
Because my mum had categorically told me that she hadn't been able to sell the house and that she was going to return. And there's no reason for my mum to have told me otherwise. She would have been glad if the property had been sold, because it would have been one less headache for her to have to worry about with dad's illness. So I went to, I called 111 and I said that, my parents have been defrauded. And at this point, I think I was perhaps suspicious that something may have happened to my mum. And the Metropolitan Police sent 2 officers to my house, and they said, look, we can't really do anything. This isn't our jurisdiction. Your mum died in Pakistan, and, you really need, if you get us some evidence, then maybe we'll consider it. By this, a few months later, my dad's brother had faxed over all the evidence, the fraud papers, the paperwork showing that the property now belonged to this Salman Bersha. He also sent over the sales contract. And when I looked at it, I thought, that's not my parents' signatures.
Okay.
How has this happened? So then I called 111 again, and I quoted the CAD reference number that I'd been given. And I said, look, you asked for fraud papers. I've got the fraud papers. And they said, okay, we'll send an officer around. This time it was only one officer. And she didn't even look at the papers. She showed no interest whatsoever. And she said to me, you need to go and see a family lawyer. And I was furious. I went, a family lawyer? I said, you go to see a family lawyer if you're getting divorced, not if a crime's been committed. And I was just furious at this point. So I put all the evidence together in a folder, and a few days later, I went off to the nearest big police station to us at the time. And I went in, and they again fobbed me off and said, oh, your mum died in Pakistan, we can't help you. And I refused to leave. I had my folder of evidence and I wasn't going anywhere. So they called a sergeant over, and he came, and it was almost like he was bored sitting there on the other side of the perspex glass, and I was, refusing to go. And I said that, my mum is a British citizen, and I think something's happened to her. And look, here's all the evidence. She's been defrauded of £320,000. Something has happened to her. And he turned his screen towards me and said, jurisdiction. We don't have jurisdiction. And I think I just thought I was going to explode at that point. And I said, well, you had jurisdiction for Madeleine McCann. You went over to Portugal and you went for my mum. And at the time, well, not at that particular time, but I'm an avid reader, and I'd read a lot of honour crime killings, over the years. And there was a particular case that came to mind. And it was the case of Sergit Atwell. And she was a young woman in her 20s from Hayes who had been tricked into going to India to attend a family wedding, but she never came back. And the Metropolitan Police sent a team over to India. They investigated. They didn't even have a body. And I was standing in Harrow Police Station telling this police officer about this case. And the Met got convictions of her husband and her mother-in-law here in Hayes, and they were sent to prison. And they didn't even have a body. So I said, why can you not investigate my mother's death? I said, you've got a body. We've brought her body back. Although it had been a whole year had passed.
Right.
By this point. But he just dismissed me. And that's when I went back to my office, and, I was very upset. And I thought, well, maybe I could try my parents' MP. And then I turned to Steve Pound, sent him a letter. He invited me into his GP, his surgery. Sorry, not his GP. He invited me to his surgery, and I went to visit him. And I was astonished when I got there that not only did he want for me to tell him about what had happened, he actually had a file and had actively taken steps and told me all the steps that he'd taken, that he'd contacted the Home Office, he'd contacted the Hertfordshire coroner, and CID were going to be appointed, and that they were going to investigate, my mother's death. And I was like, overwhelmed at, the work that Steve Pound had done. And that then triggered, led to an inquest, and the Hertfordshire coroner then opened an inquest into our mother's death. So that would have been in 2015 at some point.
And what was the outcome of the inquest?
The outcome, so during the inquest, there was lots of hearings took place, and there were arguments about whether or not to exhume my mum's body. The MP had said to me that they only exhume about 1% of suspected death killings in the UK, and that I shouldn't get my hopes up. But the coroner, Mr. Sullivan, at the time said that he believed he had a body in his jurisdiction with no cause of death, and the fraud papers gave rise to suspicion. He then made an order for my mother's body to be exhumed. Her body was exhumed 22 months after she was buried, and the pathologist that was instructed was Dr. Nathaniel Carey, one of the leading pathologists in the UK. I subsequently discovered he'd also done Alexandra Litvinenko, who'd been poisoned, the Russian national that was living in the UK. He'd also done the autopsies on the Soham girls, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. So he was a very, very experienced pathologist. His findings were that he believed, and it was absolutely galling, that he believed that my mother had been poisoned and or smothered or both.
So the paperwork that you had, the fraudulent paperwork, who proved that it was fraudulent, number one, and was that enough to have the body exhumed?
So what happened was, if I go back a bit into the details of the inquest, is before the coroner made the decision to exhume my mum's body, because the Met kept shunning me, I then took it upon myself to hire a private investigator.
Right.
And I had no idea. I'm a routine solicitor. We do, routine personal injury claims. And at the time, we would get paper copies of the Law Society Gazette. I was flicking through the Gazette. And yes, there were private investigators listed in there, but I didn't feel that they could handle something as complex as this. You're talking about cross-jurisdictional issues. My mother's British. The crime started in the UK, but part of it took place in Pakistan. So I was going through Google, and I just took a big risk instructing a company that I had never heard of before. No one could recommend anyone to me. I had a good feeling, and I found a company called Conflict International, as you know, and I was put through straight away to a guy called John Fawcett, and he instilled complete confidence in me. He told me about a similar situation of a property that had been sold, I think, 11 times over in Kenya, but they managed to make a recovery back for the family. It took time, but he did it. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to put my faith in this guy. And he asked me to send him a brief. I put a brief together, gave him as much information about my mum's brother here in the UK, as much information as I could about the suspect in Pakistan. And then before I knew it, they did a full-blown investigation. John Fawcett he actually had an investigator on the ground in Lahore who carried out very extensive investigations. They interviewed the housekeeper, and the spider's web really started unraveling. And John said to me, he said, "You can't trust anyone." He said, we think that your housekeeper was involved as well. He said, I don't even think you can trust the lawyer that you've appointed over there to help you recover the assets. We had all our faith and trust in John. And then I think it was September 2015, John's report landed in my inbox. And, his findings were astonishing. They had even put the suspect under surveillance, and he was seen visiting our house and laughing and joking with the housekeeper, and our housekeeper had told us that he had never met the suspect after my mum's death. And all of this was revealed in the report. My mum's brother said that in London that he had barely travelled to Pakistan, and yet the evidence showed that he had travelled there 5 or 6 times. I mean, who travels to Pakistan 5 or 6 times unless they're up to something, or they've got young children or a family.
Sure.
So Conflict obviously then produced a report. That report was actually relied on by the Hertfordshire coroner and our counsel. Our barrister was a guy called Adam Pater, who specialises in inquests of this nature. And the coroner was convinced by the report produced by Conflict International that there was real grounds for suspicion, and then the order was made to exhume our mother's body.
Okay. Did the authorities take notice then, after the body was exhumed and there was evidence of poisoning?
No, then at this point, so of course I went back to the Met and the Foreign Office. They were both sort of shunning me off and offloading me against each other. Go to the Foreign Office. Oh, well, it's not all conclusive. I said, but it's enough. They said, you need to go to the Met Police. Went to the Metropolitan Police, and they said, no, we don't have jurisdiction. And I said, but you need to look at my uncle's phone and check his phone history, look at his bank statements, look at his passport, see how many times he's been to Pakistan. I handed the evidence to the Metropolitan Police on a golden platter, and they did nothing and kept saying, we don't have jurisdiction. Go to the Pakistani police. Went to the Pakistani police. The Pakistani police said, no, we need authority and guidance from your UK police. And, I was just going round and round in circles, and that's the point at which we then had to make the decision that I can't let this consume my life. I had 2 really young children at the time. And in fact, I'd just had a newborn baby. And, you know, after discussing it with my family, I said, look, maybe we should now just focus on recovering the stolen assets, because we're just not getting anywhere. The Pakistani police are not doing anything because they're relying on the Met. The Met won't do anything because they're saying they don't have jurisdiction.
So your focus shifted from... So the assets then were in this third party's name.
Yeah.
The land, the money,
and the house.
And the house. How did you then take steps to try and... I mean, obviously someone must have contacted this individual. Did you try and speak to this person? Did you try and tell him that you know what's going on?
So my dad's brother found somebody, and it is all detailed in my book, which is why I've written a book, because it's such a long story. And this individual who helped said, look, I'm helping you, but I don't want you to now tell people, you know, how I've helped you and what I've done, and because he doesn't want his country tarnished in any way. But there's nothing in my book that you can't find on the internet. I mean, you just have to put in the Google search engine, corruption in Pakistan, property fraud, and it's just full of it.
So
you know,
what did this individual do then? And who this individual?
It was a very complicated process, but he essentially found a buyer in Dubai who was willing to take on the litigation, essentially buy off at a hugely discounted price all of the property and assets, and he would then fight the fraudster to prove that it had been a fraud, so that me and my family could be extricated from the situation and take the cash. But that in itself had problems, because the property had been subject to fraud. So some of the documents weren't all kosher. And again, it's all sort of detailed in my book.
Could you challenge the ownership if there were fraudulent documents?
The Defence Housing Authority, which is the district where my parents' holiday home was, they accepted that it was all genuine. They, you know, despite the fact that I showed the Pakistani police, look, these are my parents' real signatures. These are the fake signatures. They were such obvious fakes. And you know, the Met really let us down, because they could have secured through Interpol the original evidence, which would have been much better, because I actually tried to go to a handwriting expert in the UK, and he said, this is a photocopy, or, you know, a printout of a photocopy of a scan. You know, I can't do a deep handwriting analysis. He says, I can see that it's fake, because you could see the signatures were so spidery. It's like someone's trying to, you know, copy my mum's signature and my father's, and the thumbprints. Everything in Pakistan runs on thumbprints. The thumbprints could have been anyone's. You know, who's going to sit there and analyse whether it's my mum's or
there's
no
computer system that backs it up?
I don't know. Who knows? That, you know, they store these fingerprints, but who actually analyses, is this genuinely my mum's fingerprint? And they were saying, no, these signatures are genuine. I'm like, they're not genuine. Here's their genuine signatures. And this is why we needed the Met to, even if they could have appointed Interpol to secure the evidence. And again, there was only so much Conflict could do. Conflict couldn't go in and seize the records from DHA, the Defence Housing Authority, or the place where the plots of land had been stolen from us.
So we've got two issues here, right? We've got the poisoning, which is one part, and then we've got the fraud and the dissipation of assets. You shifted your focus on the fraud because the Met Police were not pursuing an investigation, or the Pakistani police were not pursuing an investigation into the poisoning at all. Did that file get closed then, or there's no file that was open anyway, in terms of the poisoning route?
I don't know what happened. I had my contact at CID. I would wait for months and months, assuming wrongly, stupidly, that they were investigating. Clearly they were doing nothing. And then they reached a point where the lawyer in Pakistan said, you need to come to attend a court hearing. The property's all been seized, and as the beneficiaries, you need to come and attend. So I then contacted the officer at the CID and said to her that, I'm heavily pregnant. I'm being asked to travel to Pakistan. I'm worried for our safety. My parents have already, I believe, my mum's been murdered, and, what if something happens to me or my baby? And nothing, they just fobbed us off all the time. And, and I said, if something happens to me, I said, it's my blood will be on your hands. I literally sent them an email to that effect, because they just weren't doing anything. The last email I had from them was where they said that my mum's case didn't meet the Code G of the PACE guidelines.
And do you know what Code G is?
I didn't at the time, because it's something I'd studied at university, which had been 30 years before. I then Googled it, and Code G relates to the powers of arrest and for there to be reasonable cause for suspicion. And there was. My mum's brother was just up the road from CID, and they did nothing.
So you then travelled back to Lahore?
So we had to do several trips. About 4 trips in total, back and forth, to try and get the property sold in what was supposed to be our names to the guy in Dubai, who was like the sort of middleman. And he would then take over the property through this guy in the military that was helping us. That all took place, that all happened, but there were complications which are detailed in my book, where my mum's brother then turned up to pursue his so-called inheritance claim under Sharia law. And the guy who was helping us in the military, he was just, I'd never seen him look anxious before. He was a very confident looking man, and he's like, your uncle turning up has caused us a huge headache. And he said, I need to make the file disappear. And that was the file of my parents' property. So he got someone in his team to implement a bug so that if my mum's brother turned up at the offices of where the plots of land were held, their whole computer system had gone down. But it had been orchestrated by this guy in the military that was helping us. But that then had a knock-on effect on us, because the deal didn't go through for the property. And so we couldn't leave Pakistan with the cash. And there's no concept of doing bank transfers from Pakistan to England or to anywhere because of the money laundering and terrorist financing issues. And we literally had to bring back suitcase loads of cash every time. And in total, we had to bring back £90,000 in sterling through the airport, when the limit at the time was €10,000. And then on our last trip, we discovered that the allowance had gone down to something like £5,000 or £6,000. And the guy in the military was really nervous about my sister and I trying to smuggle 40 grand through Lahore airport.
Right. Let's talk about the owner of the property, the fake fraudulent owner of the property. Did anyone make direct contact with him? Where is he now? What did he get involved when you guys were travelling to Lahore to try and recover your family's assets?
As far as I know, he was kept out of the picture. But I did hear subsequently, and again it's detailed in my book, that he was apprehended by the guy from the military and put in a safe house and questioned, but he denied everything. He then did eventually admit that he had forged the papers, but he wouldn't admit anything else. But that in itself was big enough for me to know that I was right all along. And had the Met acted at the time, or the Foreign Office, we would have got much further with the investigation, and perhaps I wouldn't have had to go down the route of having to smuggle suitcase loads of cash back to the UK, because I had a small baby and we just needed to draw a line and get on with our lives. But in the last 2 trips, we actually had to go back to Conflict International, because at this point, my dad's brother had decided he wasn't going to help us anymore. So we had no local help on the ground once we got to Lahore, other than the guy in the military. So we then had to go back to conflict to then try and keep us safe while we were in Lahore.
I mean, I've got so many more questions. I want to try and keep it focused. But during your research and writing the book and then being heavily vested in this, you identified other British nationals that have come across similar situations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I have, yeah. So, as I mentioned, when I was at Harrow Police Station, I mentioned about the case of Sergit Atwell, but they got an outcome. I then got a text from my friend in Spain who said, "Oh, you need to look at this case," and I opened it up, and it was about a young girl called Kelsey Devlin, who was 27 at the time, and she had a Pakistani partner, and they had 2 children. And this was during COVID, and it was June 2021, I believe. And he said, "Oh, you need to bring the children over. My mother's ill. The kids need to see their grandmother." And Kelsey died. Apparently, she had a heart attack, and then her cause of death oscillated between sepsis and COVID, and it was just all, there was just no real reason given for her cause of death. Her parents, her family, were very suspicious. But what's incredible here is that if everything was all kosher, why have her 2 young children, Zara and Zayn, never been returned to the UK? And the UK government, as far as I can see, have done absolutely nothing to help the Devlin family. The only person helping the Devlin family is their local priest, Alex Frost, who's doing everything he can to try and support and help the family. A couple of weeks ago, I came across another case, a guy in his 50s called Ranjit Power, who disappeared whilst on a business trip in 2015 in India. His body was never found. A local guy confessed to his murder 3 weeks after, but then referred to the fact that there were Britons involved in the murder, and the Britons are walking around freely. And Ranjit Power's family have been trying to get justice for the last 10 years, and they haven't, and they're getting no help. And so one of the things I do want to do now that I've written the book is I thought perhaps it's just a small isolated group of people to whom this has happened, so I went to see an MP, and the MP said, "I'm going to put this question to Parliament and see if I can get any data for you." That data is due to be sent to me at the end of March. But last week, I got an email saying, "Dear SS, you might want to have a look at this link." I clicked on the link, and it's something called the Hansard Report, which was released in May 2025. Over 250 British nationals have been murdered, not killed, murdered in Pakistan, Tunisia, France, and America between 2010 and 2015. And that's just 4 countries.
Wow. Those are the ones that have been recorded, right?
And they're the ones that have been recorded, yeah. And one of the key points made in the Hansard Report is that these families are left to navigate all these cross-jurisdictional issues in foreign countries, and they're getting absolutely no help from the UK government. And that is exactly what happened to us. And had I not found Conflict International, we wouldn't have been able to investigate what happened to our mother. We may not have had an inquest. We may not have had the exhumation.
So originally, the book began as something personal, but now it's like you're telling your story with an awareness campaign attached to it. I note in the book you also reference Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe. Tell me the relevance there.
Well, it's actually twofold, and that's an interesting point, Mike. The first point I would make is the reason Nazanin's mentioned in my book is when the technician from Conflict came to my house for the first trip in 2021. he pulled out the tracking device that I was supposed to hide in my rucksack so that Conflict could track us 24 hours a day, make sure that we were safe and that we didn't disappear, whatever. And I laughed, and it looked like the size of a bomb. Not that I know what a bomb looks like, but with all the wires attached, it was like, oh my God, this is huge. And I laughed, and the techie, his name was Mark, and he said, it's not funny. And he said, you just have to look at the Iranian situation. And he was referring to Nazanin and said that, look, if she had had something like this, maybe, we could have shown, through the tracker that she's not there spying or even identified exactly, pinpointed where she was. And Mark said, you need to have this so that we've got eyes and ears on you at all times. So it wasn't just the tracking device. I also had software installed on my phone, and he said we'll be able to hear everything that you're saying at all times. He said, so that if you disappear and we know that you've gone to the bank and you're not there, he says we'll know otherwise. And it all then made sense. And I was like, oh my God, my husband was like, this is like something out of a James Bond movie. And as you said, Mike, we were an ordinary family, and it's incredible. And the other point I suppose I would make about Nazanin is I recently saw the BBC have done a drama on her memoir, which hasn't actually come out yet, but they've done a drama on her imprisonment, and I was astonished. I knew that her husband, Richard Radcliffe, had constantly been fighting the UK government, but I didn't appreciate until I saw the drama the effort and the extent to which he had to fight to get his wife released.
I want to close on a couple of bits now. Last Flight, the title. Why? I probably know the answer to this, but explain why you chose the words Last Flight as the book title.
I called it Last Flight because it was Mum's last flight, and potentially we were racked with nerves when we took the flight in 2021, as I said, with the tracker. In reality, I didn't know, Mike, if we were going to come back. We had to go and finish the job. We needed to do it, and it was nerve-wracking. And I suppose I thought this potentially could be my last flight.
And what do you hope readers would get out of reading your memoir?
An understanding of how endemic the corruption is in Pakistan, how British nationals are failed by the UK authorities, how we were failed by the Metropolitan Police. There's another case that I know of involving a young lady from West Midlands who also suddenly died of a heart attack. I believe the West Midlands Police allegedly are investigating that. And it's to highlight awareness, make people more aware. But the other thing I have done, Mike, because it wasn't available for us at the time, is I'm going to put a resources page, at the end of my book, which I'm also in the process of putting on my Secret Solicitor website, to list all the places and organisations where, if sadly a family find themselves in this situation, where they can go. So, emergency contact numbers for the Foreign Office, how to contact their local MP. I've put about Conflict International. They were brilliant for us because it was a cross-jurisdictional case. And, other resources that may help families, resources that we didn't have. And I hope also to get the government to do something, for there to be a task force like they have, for example, with the forced marriage unit. But there is nothing for murder victims.
Take my hat off to you, SS. You've really attacked this full on. Finally, what happens next for the book and your campaign behind it?
So last summer I was agented with Annette Crossland with A for Authors literary agency, and in September they began pitching to publishers. So fingers crossed that will hopefully come out once it's been taken on by a publisher. And in terms of, and updates are available on my social media. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram. And with the government, I've had the first meeting with an MP, and I'm going to keep plugging away at it.
Have you had any press and media attention at all?
I have, and there's more to come very shortly.
So I refer to you as Secret Solicitor, and that's your disguise, the glasses and the hat. It's becoming a bit of a trademark. However, I've noticed on the hat you've got the WAD, the World Association of Detectives logo. Explain to me why you're wearing that hat.
I was given this hat in my goodie bag as I was invited as guest speaker at the centennial event of the World Association of Detectives in Chicago in September 2025, where I spoke and went public for the first time about my mother's death, and I talked about the investigation, how we were helped by private investigators and the benefits of private investigators, because without conflict we would never have got where we did.
Yeah, I remember being there, and I'm going to come in a little bit more. Not only did you speak, you explained your story in a room full of 300 international investigators from all over the world. The World Association of Detectives, as you know, is a group of 1,000 investigators representing 89 countries around the globe, and it's cases like yours where the international reach and expertise of the WAD, those are really strong benefits, and that's what helps in an international private sector intelligence world. Thank you. It's been a pleasure discussing this with you today. We're here supporting you all the way, as you know, and if there's anything else we can do for you at any time, just please contact us.
Thank you very much, Mike, and to John Fawcett, who was absolutely incredible, and James and Mark, the tech team.
So for all of SS's updates, the book, her journey, her conversations with government, here are the details on the screen, the website, the LinkedIn, the Instagram, all the contact methods for Secret Solicitor. You're listening to Leaders Podcast.